Alright, I am back with another video, and this time we are doing a build concept. Now, this isn't going to be a full build, mainly because there's not really as much to talk about when it comes to this specific thing, and that is the spell Shadow Blade. Now, I have been asked a couple of times to do a build revolving around Shadow Blade, seeing how well I could optimize it or turn it into something that can be used well as a primary weapon. Long story short, and this is speaking from the perspective of, you know, playing a video game based on the D&D 5th edition system. If you try and play with Shadow Blade as your primary weapon, you are not going to have fun. Let me explain why. So, Shadow Blade, as you can see, is a concentration spell, so it requires your concentration or the spell goes away. That costs a bonus action. It lasts until your next long rest, and what it does is it conjures a short sword that does 2 to 16 psychic damage. Now, why do I say you will not have fun using this? Well, first of all, unless your character is exceptional at making concentration saving throws, you're going to have your main weapon just disappear out of your hand. And the two classes that give you proficiency in Constitution saving throws, Fighter and Sorcerer, well, you're just going to be getting better damage options out of, you know, just using what those classes are mainly built for, using other types of weapons, for in the case of Fighter, such as great short swords and other stuff. And if you're playing a Sorcerer, you're just going to want to be using your cantrips. It's hard to say that it's worth it. I mean, obviously, I aim to please, so I decided to look into, you know, the other aspects of Shadow Blade. What makes Shadow Blade stand out other than just using a magical weapon? Well, when you use the sword to attack a target that is in dim light or darkness, you make the attack roll with advantage. Being able to gain advantage on any attack roll is pretty good. However, the ability to manipulate dim light and darkness in this game is very, very limited compared to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and you're just not going to be able to do it as much as you think, mainly because the darkness spell, which would be the main way of doing this, inflicts the blindness status condition, so if you go in there to try and do damage with Shadow Blade, well, you're also going to be taking disadvantage on your attack rolls anyway, which nullifies, you know, the whole point, unless I'm thinking of darkness wrong, but I just don't see how that works. Regardless, I have a couple of ideas, but they're not concrete. I'm going to be showing off some equipment that I think can help bolster Shadow Blade, because unfortunately, also unlike 5th edition, we don't actually have Shadow Blade as a regular spell. You have to get it from a piece of equipment, that being a ring that is locked to a quest in Act 2. So, with that in mind, you can't upscale this spell, you can't upcast it, which means the sword is never going to do more than 2d8 of damage, which sucks, like, a lot. You're going to be suffering in the late game, especially when you see all that +2 or even +3 magical equipment that you're just limiting yourself to not be able to use. Like, don't get me wrong, a Shadow Blade challenge run could be interesting, but again, it's only a challenge run that you could really start in Act 2, unless you modded the ring that gives you it in. So, it's really tricky to do, but I've got two build ideas and some equipment that I think could work with Shadow Blade to give it a lot of extra oomph, because there might be some things about Shadow Blade that are specific to this game that you might not have known about. So, let's get into the equipment first. So, for starters, the biggest part of, you know, Shadow Blade's weakness is being concentration based. So, really, you want to be able to bump up your AC as much as you can. So things like the Cloak of Protection, the Evasive Shoes, those are all seriously important. A piece of armor like the Armor of Agility could also work, but of course you only get this in X3, so but basically, and using a shield as well, because you can use a shield with Shadow Blade, you want to bump your AC as high as you can to avoid getting hit in the first place. But that's just kind of a side thing. Let's look at the actual equipment. Obviously, the most important ability, or equipment even, that we get here is the Shadow Blade Ring, which you get in Act 2 by completing a quest line. I mean, all it does is give you Shadow Blade, which, yes, this is the only way to get it in the game, and that sucks. This takes up a ring slot that could be used for something else, also sucks. I feel like I'm really shitting on Shadow Blade in this game, but I feel like it is such a trap for players who are fond of the 5e variant, which is way stronger than this in so many aspects. But let's look at what I've kind of come up with to try and buff this thing up. The Ring of Arcane Synergy. When you deal damage with a cantrip, you gain Arcane Synergy for 2 turns. This, if you don't know, I've featured it in a few builds before, allows your weapon damage to be increased by your spellcasting ability modifier. Pretty good on anything that you kind of use cantrips for and kind of make a gish out of. This is really, really good. And for the record, somebody asked us before, gish is just an old word for, like, Gif Yankee characters who use martial and magic at the same time. It's basically just a shorter way of saying spell sword for D&D nerds. But anyways, this is basically going to give you the ability to kind of get more damage out of Shadow Blade after casting a cantrip, which I'll get to in a minute. Next up is the Diadem of Arcane Synergy. It's basically just going to be another way for you to do it, and it happens after you inflict a condition. So if you end up getting a condition through one of your spells, which we'll get to in a minute, you'll be able to get it for even longer, but really this is unnecessary. You only really need the ring. And looking at the actual Shadow Blade itself, because of the way I have things set up with a Warlock build, this is doing 2d8 plus 5 damage, so it gets a maximum damage total of 21 if you hit the maximum amount of damage. Yeah, try playing through Act 3 with this as your main weapon on Tactician. You are not going to have a good time, my friends. This is... It's not great. I can't stress how much this is just not a good option. But again, it was been talked about so many times, I feel like I kind of have to, you know, talk about it, so I am. There is one thing, though, that does buff up the damage of Shadow Blade, and also all psychic spells. I'm going to be getting into slight spoiler territory here as I talk about this, so skip ahead a little bit if you don't want to hear it, but it's not major. But at the end of Act 2, so by this point you will have the Shadow Blade ring, when you enter the Mind Flayer colony beneath Moonrise Towers, you can get your access to an item called a Resonance Stone. I'll leave the wiki page in the description that shows how to get it. What this basically does is, for the cost of taking disadvantage on your mental saving throws, being Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma, you get the ability to deal double psychic damage in the form of making anyone who is in a certain radius around you vulnerable to psychic damage. That will double the damage of Shadow Blade. But in that case, you might as well also be using the Silver Sword of the Astral Plane, which you can get in Act 1, or any of the other multitude of spells or weapons that deal psychic damage. For example, my Psionic Warrior build, you could take that, grab the Resonance Stone on that build, and suddenly you're dealing double damage, making that build even more powerful. So, again, it's not really worth taking Shadow Blade here. I'm sorry, it's just not. And I really hope I'm not being too much of a downer in this video, but I feel like this just kind of needs to be like a wake-up call, like, this is the best you're going to get. This video is a warning. It is a warning to not do this in your game. But let's actually get into the build itself that I've kind of come up with. My first one was just to go flat Warlock 12 or Fighter 1 Warlock 12 if you want, like, armor and comm save proficiency. Why did I go with this? Well, one of the strongest ways to kind of buff up a finesse-based weapon, and also be able to get a bunch of utility out of spells, is to go Warlock and go Pact to the Blade, because since the Shadow Blade is an actual weapon that can go in your inventory, it can be bound with Bind Pact Weapon from the Pact Blade Warlock. So you can get your extra attack, and you can make it use your Charisma for the attack and damage modifiers, meaning you get to be a bit more single ability score dependent. And in this case, I've gone with the Great Old One Warlock subclass. Now what that does is that's actually going to give you a bunch of psychic spells. So our Telekinesis, Dominate Person, Fear, Phantasmal Killer, Dissonant Whispers, Friends, Hex, Tasha's Hideous Laughter, Hypnotic Gaze, Advanced Black Tentacles, Eye Bite, and also other fun things like Conjure Elemental and Misty Step, you're going to get a few cool things here, and overall it is going to make for like a fun psychic build that is on theme with using Shadowblade, but it's also going to give us the Eldritch Blast cantrip, which I have fully specced into here. Because of our high charisma, and the fact that we can take the Eldritch Invocations to buff this baby up, we now have a second constant powerful source of damage for if our concentration on Shadowblade breaks. So at the end of the day, if you wanted to use Shadowblade for the fun factor, which is basically non-existent in my opinion, but hey-ho, Eldritch Blast is going to be either your primary or secondary option here, with the casting of Eldritch Blast giving you the arcane synergy from the ring buffing Shadowblade. So it's overall you playing this kind of melee and close-ranged psychic fighter, which I think is pretty cool. But of course, this build doesn't really take advantage of the, advantage gained from being in Dim Light or Darkness. So if you wanted to play around with this, I would actually recommend running this with a Shadow Monk, going all the way into, like, Wisdom, and your Dex for high AC, going into Wisdom, for your features, and then casting Darkness using the Shadow Teleport, manipulating the Darkness and Dim Light as best you can, and using sneak attacks and surprise attacks. So maybe like a Shadow Monk Rogue build could actually really, really work here for kind of getting the most out of Shadowblade's damage. But then again, you could just be using another +2 weapon or something, like a dagger that does a ton of damage on, like, surprise rounds or crit hits, and just get more out of it. I feel like I'm being very harsh on Shadowblade, but I feel like I was going to like keep getting requests for it unless I addressed it in a video. But why even go this far in the first place? Why would I not just type a couple of comments to say, hey, Shadowblade isn't really good, I wouldn't recommend it, and move on with my day? Well, I think a lot of people from Baldur's Gate who play Baldur's Gate come from 5th edition. They come from either playing D&D themselves, or watching D&D videos, or like listening to D&D podcasts like Critical Role, or maybe they watch the Dungeon Dudes, or D&D Deep Dive, D4. There could be like a bunch of different stuff. And everyone will talk about how Shadowblade is a really fun spell in that game, and it's like a really cool concept, obviously. If you wanted to, like, this psychic blade that you summon that, like, deals more damage in the shadows, and it has a ton of potential for combos. But in Baldur's Gate 3, where everything's a bit more gamified and concepts are less loose, you don't have a DM that can swing things in your favor. You play by the game's rules or none at all. And again, with the limited spell pool and character level in comparison to 5th edition, you really can't manipulate the way certain mechanics work as much without directly modifying the game, or I guess homebrewing it if you wanted to get a bit more technical. But so I feel like people were going to kind of keep suggesting Shadowblade, not kind of realizing how limiting that actually is. So I really wanted to kind of address this in a video and just say, hey, you can do things with Shadowblade, but you're not going to have fun with it unless you're doing a specific challenge run. It's just not worth it. But I feel like the options I have provided, as limited as they are, will work. Is there anything I've forgotten to go over? Oh, these arm pieces here. When you deal psychic damage, you also inflict mental fatigue for 2 turns. Mental fatigue, basically for every turn that remains, will give your enemy a -1 penalty to their wisdom, intelligence, and charisma saving throws. It's a bit like Reverberation, but not quite as good. Just an extra thing that can work with Shadowblade. Totally forgot to mention it, but I'm bringing it up now. My thoughts are a little bit all over the place here. I literally just didn't even think. I just turned on the recording and just said go. But yeah, I think that's probably going to do it for me here. Very much a shorter video this time. And I'm sorry it was so negative. I try to keep a bit more of a creative and upbeat, like, positive vibe in my videos, but Shadowblade just isn't very good. And I feel like I would much rather just, like, put a video out there kind of giving my thoughts on it, providing what I think is a decent way to use it in the form of this, like, Warlock build. But overall, I would just stay away. There's definitely some more fun alternatives to using Shadowblade if you want that kind of psychic sword feel. Like I said, the Silver Sword of the Astral Plane is a really, really good option. I believe there's also, like, Voss's Silver Sword, which is a long sword, that, like, can deal psychic damage. I will also, there is some more stuff on the wiki that isn't coming to me off the top of my head right now, but I'll have some images on screen kind of showing some other alternatives if you really, really wanted to go with something that feels like Shadowblade, but maybe isn't. But yeah, that is going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Again, sorry it was quite negative, but I feel like, again, it needed to be said. But yeah, why did I say that like it was an apology video? Oh, I hope I don't tick off enough people with this video that I have to do like a, I messed up. Like I have to put on like, not even like I have to get like a webcam to like put my face on the screen and just be like, I fucked up. I said some incredibly mean things about Shadowblade, and I have reflected on myself. If I can't even fucking keep this up. Goodbye. Don't use Shadowblade. It's bad, and it will make you feel bad.